We saw increases in blood cortisol. So as soon as they're exposed to smoke, there's this increase. We also saw increases in acute phase protein, so haptoglobin and ceruloplasmin, and that remains elevated post-smoke exposure for a certain period of time. We also saw changes on the blood cell populations that I can't remember top of my head, to be honest, but there was changes on lymphocyte, neutrophils, and monocyte population compared to the baseline.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. Today I have Juliana Ranches. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
All right. So I've always tried to work on my Portuguese, but I have Juliana here. Juliana is a colleague of mine at Oregon State. She's the beef extension specialist located in Burns, Oregon, on the eastern end of the state. So it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Juliana.
Hi, Travis. Happy to be here. It's a beautiful afternoon, but I'm going to enjoy our conversation for sure.
Good. So Juliana is an assistant professor. Like I said, she's a beef extension specialist. Been here about going almost 5 years now.
Yeah, I started 2020.
Yeah. And so I think for the audience sake is kind of give the overview of, you're pretty new, still pretty new professor. Not old like some of us and graying like some of us, but kind of give you an overview of, your progression of you as a grad student at Florida. Did some mineral research and then grew up in Brazil.
Yeah.
So kind of give that overview for our audience.
Sure. So I'm originally from Brazil. I did my bachelor's degree in animal science at Unesp Botucatu. And with that, in 2013, I came actually to ERC, where I'm based, research center at Oregon State University, to do an internship. And after that, I decided I want to stay and go to grad school. And I was lucky enough to join Dr. John Artington at the University of Florida to be his student. So I stayed there for a master's and a PhD, work a lot at mineral nutrition, specifically trace minerals. And then in 2020, I got my job here at OSU and moved early. Actually, I moved in 2019. I started a job in 2020. And since then, I've been here for almost 5 years now. 5 years actually. And I've been still work in nutrition, mineral nutrition. We're doing a little bit on vitamins too. Doing quite a bit of work on smoke exposure, virtual fencing, and methane emissions and mitigation. So I changed a little bit from what I was trained to do what I feel like it's more related to our stakeholders here in Oregon. But I continue to do quite a bit in nutrition.
Yeah, I think one, you've got this really broad background from Brazil, of these tropical climates, of Florida, of doing research down in Ona with John with trace minerals, and then being in a very arid climate in eastern Oregon. But I think an important thing that you pointed out is even though you still do some trace mineral research is, as an extension specialist or even working just in a university setting, we work for stakeholders, right? So we don't, we get paid by Oregon State, but we work for our stakeholders, and they have needs and big needs, and one of the things that a lot of your research now has focused on is smoke, is the impact of some of these wildfire and how are they impacting livestock performance of beef cows, even in some of the dairy instances as well. And so tell us about, that research, because that's really impactful on this side of the United States that have these wildfires that pop up every year that we have fires.
Yeah. And it's, it's interesting that I feel like for us, the wildfires and the wildfire season, it's a reality and we are very aware of it. But not everybody across the US or globally are fully aware. I think people are getting more used to this situation now, like at least realizing it's a problem. But even me, when I moved to here in 2020, It was a horrible fire season, and it was my first year in Oregon, and it was just crazy. I would come to work every morning, and during the summer, the sky was gray or orange. You couldn't tell if it was raining, if it was just like it's super weird. And then, so 2020 was my first year being exposed to those conditions. And I remember that the Oregon Department of Health, they were like, yeah, stay inside, make a clean air room for you. Make sure you don't exercise outside, reduce exercising. So multiple recommendations for us to prevent any problems related to inhalation of that smoke. And that got me thinking, like, what about the cows? I mean, the cows are outside. They cannot, right, get away from it. So that got me thinking about it. And with collaboration with University of California, we started a survey simply to ask producers what was their observation of smoke exposure and if they were seeing anything on the herds. Because to me, it was something it is clear that we have negative impacts of that smoke exposure. So with that first survey, I think we did it back in 2021. Yeah, and we got some and yeah, for it was 2021, and we got asked people to look back at 2020 fire season, and most of producers reported that they were suspecting of lower birth weights, lower milk production, more cases of pneumonia, and things on that line. So that's how we kind of start with the studies that we have now. It was basically looking back and asking producers what was their take on that smoke exposure, and probably me freaking out a little bit when I moved to Oregon.
I mean, that's a big change, and not only that COVID happened in 20, but that's massive of moving from Florida that does have the rainy season and early dry season, but coming out here to this arid environment, and then all of a sudden all these fires are affecting everything, and to be able to quickly shift and think about the impact of what is it doing to our producers and their livelihoods is very important. And so I know now you have some funding, you got ongoing projects focused on these impacts, and have some metabolism type studies where you're smoking out cows in barns, and some pretty nicely designed studies to look at some of the impacts. So you want to kind of touch on that?
Yeah, that's exactly what we call them, the smokehouse. So one of the challenges that we faced at the very beginning like back in 2020, 21, when we were trying to go for funding, it was the unpredictability of natural wildfires. So nobody kind of wanted to fund us simply because they were like, yeah, but what if you don't get a fire that year? What are you going to study, right? There's no smoke if there's no fire. So we did, back in 2022, we did a trial with natural exposed smoke, but it was very logistically challenging. We had 3 herds across the state, and it's Oregon, right? So it's like when we have 3 herds, they were like 5 hours apart or more, and we had to monitor those over prior to fire season, which is by Forest Service. It starts in July 5th. So we have to monitor the 3 herds prior to season. So we're working with those herds monthly prior to the fire season. Then we wait till a fire happened. And then luckily it happened in one of those locations. So we continue to collect samples from those animals after that fire, smoke exposure had happened. And we saw, that was our first study, very challenging, but we saw that there was indication of metabolic changes, physiological changes, where we saw increases in cortisol and acute phase proteins on those animals that had been exposed to that smoke right after the smoke exposure. We saw great increases in cortisol that were comparable to the same levels at cortisol at weaning. So that was very interesting for us. And with that initial effort, we were, funded with what we now call the Smokehouse, which is a project where we have the capacity of creating our own smoke. So we have a barn, and we have our animals inside of the barn, and then we burn something, so we create our own smoke and then expose them to mimic what we see naturally in the environment. Of course, it's not the same smoke. Smoke is a very complex um, problem, but we can create a smoke that has the same level of PM 2.5, so particulate matter 2.5, which is the main component of smoke. And we're seeing very similar results to what we saw before in terms of in terms of health, and now we have the capacity to look at performance too.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it as we know some of these impacts would be negative. The challenge is designing studies actually find that. It's like studying drought, and if you design a study to look at the impact of drought, you will not have a drought. And so it's very difficult to design these studies to actually find some impacts of whatever it is because of these natural occurring events that we have no control over. And that's what's cool about this study is designing these facilities or retrofitting this barn where you can, mimic as best your ability to mimic a natural setting of exposure to smoke.
Yeah, it was, when we first started, I was like super nervous. We did so many burning trials to figure out how we could make smoke. I was like, my entire life, I always thought I would be working with cows, but here I am burning things. It wasn't bad. I had fun. My students probably hate me because of it. Everybody stunk every single day. But it was interesting. So we now are able to, produce the smoke every day. So whenever we have the trial going on, it's a 36-day trial. We expose those animals to about 7 days to smoke. And during that smoke exposure, we get high fluctuation on the PM 2.5, but we get on average about 150 micrograms per cubic meter of smoke, particulate matter 2.5, I'm sorry. And that's so if you look at the EPA values and the air quality index, that would be on the purple, so very in health level of smoke exposure. So we can really mimic a less than PM 2.5 what we see naturally.
What kind of results are you finding in terms of, I know, a lot of these stress hormones are increasing, like you said earlier, that mimics, the stress of weaning, et cetera. And so what kind of other results are you finding with the impact of smoke?
Yeah, so far, we look primarily in the blood samples of those animals at this point. So we have a 2-year trial we just conducted last year, the second year last year. We saw, similar to what we saw to naturally exposed calves, we saw increases in blood cortisol. So as soon as they're exposed to smoke, there's this increase. We also saw increases in acute phase protein, so haptoglobin and ceruloplasmin, and that remains elevated post-smoke exposure for a certain period of time. We also saw changes on the blood cell populations that I can't remember top of my head, to be honest, but there was changes on lymphocyte, neutrophils, and monocyte population compared to the baseline. And we are now looking at the feed intake data, and apparently, this is very brand new. I was looking at the data last week, and we are seeing that this one is a limitation of the study because we don't have a control group, but technically those animals that were weaned, they were about a month after weaning, so they're still growing. And my expectation for those animals is to see a consistent intake over time. But what we are seeing on the data at this point is that on the first 2 weeks, they were consuming in a increasing rate. But during the smoke exposure, that kind of goes down. So I need to go back to the data and make sure this is what we are really seeing. I want to predict what would be the intake for those animals with, just calculating and see if that's a true finding that we are seeing. But I'm just a, very quick overview of the data. It seems that the, smoke exposure does inhibit consumption. And those animals were just consuming hay and just water, so a very simple diet, nothing that would metabolic be offensive to them, So I think that's need to go back to the data, but I think if that's really true, it would be a major finding of this study.
Yeah, that would make sense during these events that intake would go down. But this is post-event. You're seeing maybe some decrease in dry matter intake as well.
We saw like there was a reduction in intake during compared to the previous week, and there was also like the next week they were at the same level of the previous one. There was no increase, and then they start to increase. So there was like a stagnation on the intake, where for those animals I would expect to see they consuming like increasing amounts over time. They're just weaned calves eating alfalfa, at Lipton. So they could eat a lot, but they were not.
Have y'all started looking at some lung issues? I know you posted something the other day about lungs after fire events, but have y'all started looking at that as well?
So that's a great question. That's something we want to do, but not necessarily for this study. With the lung issues, there could be some lung damage due to the smoke inhalation. But the problem is with that size of calf we decide to work with, so weaned calves about a month after weaning, it is really hard to ultrasound the lungs. So we did for baby calves on another project we have with dairy calves. That's no-brainer, super easy. We see the damage in the lung when they're exposed, but for that size of calf that we're using right now, it's just my ultrasound skills are not that good, I would say. It's just difficult to see. But what we are interested in doing next is actually developing for producers a way to identify if what we are seeing in those calves is smoke exposure or some other type of disease. Because what we've been noticing on the calves with exposed to smoke is that they have very similar, symptoms or visuals to BRD. So they have running nose, they have running eyes, drip ears, and I got quite a bit of producers asking me like, so should I treat it? Should I treat it with antibiotics? Is this BRD? This is what it is. And there's a lot of people that were going to this route, treating animals that were possibly not suffering from anything other than just being exposed to smoke. So that's where we want to go next, is to develop a decision tool for producers to figure out if they want to treat those animals or not. So that's where we want to go. And then eventually something I would love to do is to kind of follow calves till the feedlot, because I feel like there might be something that we see there in terms of performance and treatment recover, or how many times they get treated for any of the problems we see in feedlot, especially respiratory disease.
Yep, and that's what was my thoughts, is if these calves are exposed and have this insult to their lungs earlier on, are we increasing the chance of some kind of health event in the feedlot with BRD or just respiratory issues altogether? And are we seeing an increase in that in the feedlot in these calves?
Yeah, this is something I would love to do. And I've been talking to some people to see if we can, come up with some sort of collaboration, or maybe just retrospective data that we look at to have an initial thought. Colorado has a lot of fires too. I'm sure we could find some animals. It's just been busy, but this is definitely something I would like to do because, I have a gut feeling that there might be something there.
Yep, I agree. So definitely very important research. It's something that, as you saw your career as leaving or coming to Oregon State and leaving Florida as a grad student, definitely wasn't on your radar, but definitely really cool research and needed by producers, especially in the Northwest. And like I say, Colorado is another state that deals with a lot of fires as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, when we started, it was just nobody, everybody was like, what are you going to do? Like, okay, we know it, but it's bad, but what are you going to do? But now we have a better understanding of what happens. And another step of this research is also try to come up with something that can reduce. So now that we know it's stressful, it starts a immune response for those animals. So what else can we do? So at this fall, we're gonna be working with probably trying to hydrate more those calves. We're probably gonna try to supplement electrolytes or something that could have help to minimize this impact we're seeing. We want to try very practical options that producers can easily adopt on those situations. So electrolyte will be the first one we'll be trying, and then we might use betaine too, but I'm not 100% sure yet.
So, is there questions about what's the level should I be concerned with, and is there some kind of a threshold that my cows are fine, or I need to get these cows away?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And, so right now for the control smoke exposure, we smoke them for 7 days, 150 micrograms per cubic meter every day. And we came up with that 7 days number because that's the kind of number of bad air days in Oregon. So we had to come up with a number. There was no how we come up with. But I feel like there's a lot of factors that can play to the pen answer to this question. So, for example, our first study with natural exposure, calves were much younger. Those were beef and dairy calves. I think they were about 3 months old. Not even that, 2 to 3 months old. And they were exposed to poor air quality for 3 consecutive days, and the PM 2.5 was only 45. And they still had the same responses we are seeing in the control smoke exposure studies. So I think it really depends on the age animal, previous disease case, um, the length of it, the intensity of it. So there's a lot of variation. I'm sure they can tolerate a little bit, but prolonged exposure is likely to have more drastic effects, I would say.
Seems like there's a big area here of unknowns. This is relatively new, right? And it's just not impacting the beef industry; it's impacting the dairy industry in the Northwest as well. And they probably have some methods that you don't have to deal with it, as sprinklers, airflow issues in barns. These cows are out grazing in range situations, really remote, and there's not a lot of methods that we have that can help with this.
Yeah, on the grazing side, it will be a little bit more challenging to apply anything that could reduce, the negative effects we're seeing. That's why we want to come up with electrolyte solution that you can easily dump in the water, or something you can feed to them and get them ready for that situation. Because it's fire, right? There is a little bit we can prep to. I mean, smoke. Fire, not necessarily you can prep so much for it, but the smoke you might be able to prep a little bit more for. But on the dairy side, they have probably a little bit more chances of, you can either move them to a barn, work with clean air or something like that, the sprinklers and everything. But we have some collaborators in Idaho that are working with dairy cows, and they saw quite a bit of a drop in milk production. So, it's challenging too. I think they saw up to a kilo of milk production decreasing per day of smoke exposure. So it's a lot.
Definitely big impact.
Yeah.
Well, to start wrapping us up, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to touch on?
I mean, it's an area that's brand new. There's not a lot of folks working in this area, so we have probably more questions than we have answers for, but it's something that I'm very interested. I plan to continue to work on this area, and hopefully we can come up with solutions and maybe some answers to those questions. But it's a challenging area for sure.
It definitely is a big challenge, and it's challenging just from the natural part of the occurrence of these, but it's also a challenge of how do you design studies that actually mimic correctly the impacts, and then how can we come up with solutions that are actually something that producers can adopt and utilize. And that's also the the big challenge of that is there may be some good solutions out there, but they're not going to work from a production standpoint.
Yeah, it's an area of research that has its challenges in every front, but I'll keep trying.
Well, someone has to, right?
Yeah, someone has to, so we'll do.
Really good stuff. Really appreciate your insight and what you're doing for our producers in the state.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Thanks very much.
It's time for our famous three. For over 60 years, bioMérieux has been a world leader in diagnostics, now revolutionizing the beef and meat industry with augmented diagnostics, addressing critical challenges such as food safety risks and recalls, production costs and waste, as well as environmental and consumer concerns. bioMérieux offers a fresh approach that goes beyond test results. Their unique portfolio of microbiology testing, genomics, data solutions, and expert insights help with pathogen detection, enumeration, and root cause analyses. By providing improved risk anticipation and comprehensive data, bioMérieux empowers beef processors to confidently navigate today's complexities.
Yeah, so to wrap this up, we've got 3 questions here. And the first one is, what is your go-to highly recommended beef-related book? It could be website, resource altogether. What do you recommend people utilizing?
So, as a good extension professional, I'll always recommend my colleagues, whatever question you have, go to an extension specialist, your extension agent. That usually my to-go person. I would say there's a lot of podcasts out there too that you can go to, and good reputation journals are always good too. But I think extension is always, if it's something completely unknown to me, that's probably where I would go.
Yeah, it's a tremendous non-biased resource for producers.
Yeah.
And so a great resource. Secondly, what is a highly recommended book that you just recommend someone reading?
I like to think that I read quite a bit. But one of my favorites that it's aligned with education, faculty, right, has to do something with education. It is the book named Educated. It is about a girl from Idaho that it is in a religious community that has been completely shut away from the reality, I would say, and then she finds her way through education. So it's a very interesting story, and it's a real story. So I really recommended that so people can value education a little bit more. I think that would be my one book to recommend.
And lastly, what sets apart, in your opinion, a highly successful beef professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what makes a highly successful beef professional, is someone that, keeps up with the industry and, explore and understands the changes and keep on track of what research is doing, what the industry is doing, and keep moving forward. Try to be better and try to, help the stakeholders to the best they can. Someone that keeps getting better.
Yeah, always growing and adapting is very important, and so it's a good response. Well, Juliana, thank you for the time. Really appreciate it. A lot of good stuff, and definitely, I think, really benefit to our stakeholders and others of a lot of this research that you have going on.
Thanks very much, Travis. I appreciate that, and I had a lot of fun today, so I hope you all enjoy too.